I'd like to share a journey I took this year. It was a result of a class I went to visit my senior student teach in the spring. And I have the pleasure of going from classroom to classroom and learning lots of interesting Torah. And one of my students was teaching something from her hosting teacher, a new version of how to teach Parashat Breshit, how to teach the creation. And it inspired me, and I found that the shul had a copy of the book. And I actually wanted to show you some of the books I've been using to prepare. But really, the ideas I'm taking from a lot of different people. I haven't made any of this stuff up, and I felt the need to share that with you. That I'm not. Some of the ideas are going to seem wild. How can we do it? They're all from one of these. So Rabbi Natan Aviezer is a professor of physics at Bar Ilan University and wrote a number of books, including these two, In the Beginning and Fossils and Faith.
Physics, did you say?
Physics.
He's a professor of physics, and this is what he taught.
Yes. So those are two. From theology, Rabbi Chaim Navon, who's been a guest. He's a rabbi in Modi'in and many other places. He teaches at Herzog College. Yep, this is going to slide down. And then Rabbi Dr. Yoni Grossman, who's also been a guest of Eitz Chaim, who teaches at Herzog College as well. So the ideas are all coming from these sources and from other places I'm happy to share with you. So that's just a pre-introduction. For the introductory question, to think about a little bit, what is our job in life? What are we supposed to do now that we're in this world? Actually, let me just pause to navigate the source sheets. I'm not hoping to read everything on here. I got a little carried away. I'm very excited by these sources. And wanted to share them with you. So the first is really just to show you the two different versions about the creation of man, and I put it in English also. We're not going to read through it. I will talk about some of the differences, but you can look at it at your leisure. The first source is really on the top of page 2, where I give you 2 quotes from the Rambam. And these I just want to pause and read inside because I want to set the tone for the journey we're going to undertake tonight from these 2 halachot of the Rambam. The first one in Yesodei HaTorah, like the very first halacha that the Rambam writes, Yesod HaYesodot va'amud HaChachmot leda sheyesh shem matzui rishon. It is our obligation to know that there is a creator. V'hu mamtzi kol nimtza v'chol nimtza'im mishamayim va'aretz u'ma shebenehem lo nimtza'u elam amita timtza'o. That everything in the world, in the heavens, everything in between, anything we can possibly conceive of, are all because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created it. And what do we do with this knowledge? Our job is then ahavat Hashem, loving God, and yirat Hashem, fearing God. B'sha'ah she'yitbonen ha'adam b'ma'asav u'bero'av hanifla'im ha'gdolim. V'yir'eh mehem chochmato, she'ein la erech v'lo ketz, miyad hu ohev u'meshabeach u'mefa'er u'mitaveh ta'ava gdola le'da Hashem gadol. Then when we look at all the creations that God has made, and we realize their complexity and their beauty, we're going to desire to know more about Him and to love Him and to fear Him. Looking at the creations of God, looking at all that He is presented with, is our way to know Him, is our way to love Him. And that's really what I want to accomplish tonight, to try and look again at the creation story, at Briat HaOlam, a story that we're all familiar with, to look at it with new eyes and to see how we can better appreciate that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us. But we've got a problem because we have 2 different stories. And the 2 different stories aren't just differing in a few different elements. There's some key points that are not in alignment between the 2. And again, if you want to read the stories, I've given it to you in Hebrew and English. But note, number 1, the order. In Parak Aleph, every day there's a new creation. You can sing the song from Anka Moshe, Yom Rishon, there was light, then there was day and night, and then all the other plants and the trees, the animals, Adam and his mate. That's the order of Parak Aleph. In Parak Bet, we're told that there's a steam, this misty vapor rising. The plants haven't emerged yet. Suddenly, Adam is created. He's created single. In Parak Aleph, he's created with his mate already. In Parak Aleph, he's created on his own. He then has to go and name all the animals. It's almost implying as if the animals weren't around beforehand. He sees that there's no mate or pair for him, and thus Chava is created as well. So real discrepancy into how and when the things were created. We know God by the Shem Elohim in Parak Aleph, by Hashem Elohim in Parak Bet. In Parak Aleph, we're told that man was created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. In Perek Bet, we're told that he took afar, he took earth and formed it, Vayitzar, he made it into some sort of being, Vayipach be'aphav nishmat Elohim, and blew into him this neshama, this spiritual essence. Man in Perek Aleph is told to multiply and to conquer the earth, pru, urvu, virdu ba'aretz v'kivshuha. In Perek Bet, he's placed in Gan Eden, le'ovda u'leshamra, to keep and to guard the Garden of Eden, again, which doesn't exist in Perek Aleph. And the verbs are even very different. We have the verb vayivra, vaya'as in Perek Aleph, to create, to make, versus vayitzar, to form, in Perek Bet. So what do we do with these two different stories? How do we come together with one picture about what is man that God has created him? What is our job in earth? What are we supposed to be doing? So we're going to go through three basic ways, and then the last one will really be what we're focusing a lot of time on, but I wanted to pull back a little bit. So the first one is using a literary method, and this is done by Rashi, Radak, Rashbam. Many people are going to do it, using the principle known as klal uprat, that the first Perek Aleph is going to give us the general statement, man was created by God. And in Perek Bet, we're going to have more details. What I put for you in source 3 is from Mishnat Rabbi Eliezer, which seems to be the source for Rashi, just to get a taste of what's happening. Miklal she'acharav ma'aseh ve'ino ela pirto shel rishon. We have something that the details seem to be the details of that general principle. Kitzad, vayivra Elokim et adam b'tzalmo. The general principle is God created man in his image. V'achar kach piret et ma'asav. And afterwards we have all of the details about how exactly it was created in the image of God. V'yitzar Hashem Elokim et ha'adam, v'yipel Hashem Elokim tardima al ha'adam, v'yiven Hashem Elokim et hatzela. So Hashem formed Adam, he put him into a deep trance, he took from the side and then formed Chava. Hashomea savur shehu ma'aser acher ve'ino ela pirto shel rishon. We might think that they're really two different stories, but don't worry. They're all the same story, just focusing in more fine-tuning. And when you fine-tune, you begin to see the discrepancies. So that's one general way of explaining the two stories.
I'm sorry, is that the position that Rashi takes?
Yes, he's following that in his words. The Rashbam is going to follow. I felt I was giving enough sources. I didn't need to start going through everybody doing the same general approach. The second approach is going to look philosophically. What can we understand from the 2 points of view? We have the Rav Soloveitchik on the one hand, and Rav Breuer on the other, who the more I read them, realized that they're doing the same thing, just their focus is a little bit different. I quoted a little bit from Lonely Man of Faith. The article is 65 pages. I had a limit with how many trees I was going to dedicate for tonight. And I chose part of it where I was trying to show the difference between the two atoms. It's not necessarily the famous element of the article. I'll reference it. I have it here if you'd like to look at it. But his position is that there's atom 1 and atom 2. What is the difference between them? Atom 1 is dynamic and creative. He's a social being. He's never alone. Even from the moment of creation, he already is created with a female counterpart. He's majestic. He's supposed to be the final creature created, the whole reason why the world came into place. He's also termed the creative man. The questions that he's going to ask are, how does this work? What is going on with this? He's not looking philosophically, but more practically, so that as he understands how the world was created, he can mimic, he can become like a Tselem Elohim by also trying to go on and create different things. There's a glory, there's a power, there's a specialness that man is gifted with, this ability to move forward and to create. The Rav is very clear that there's something wrong with this version of Adam. There's a power, there's a strength, there's a beauty. But there is going to be something missing, which is why we have Perek Bet, why we have what he calls Adam 2, why we have this other man of faith, as he terms it. The second Adam is more receptive. not just interested in the pragmatics of how things came about, but in the why did God create this? How does it work? What is its purpose in life? He's the covenantal man who, unlike the social Adam, always with a mate, is alone. He has to seek out and say, I'm alone, what can you do for me? And get a mate that way. He actually sacrifices part of himself to get the mate. He wants intimate relationships, predominantly with God, but has to look within himself in order to meet God, to try and understand what God has done, to understand what the purpose of everything is, to better seek and fulfill his own purpose in life. He is the man of faith, and hence the lonely man of faith. So Perek Aleph describes one vision of man with all the name of God and what his position in the world is. Perek Bet is going to focus on this other aspect of man. We have two dual aspects. Again, they're both necessary for a complete human being, but to give them equal time, they're each given their own perek to understand. That's, in a very quick nutshell, the Rav's position. Rav Breuer is going to sound somewhat similar, but the focus is more on God. We have two different facets of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. And with both of those facets, he created the world and man. Therefore, in order to appreciate both of them, we need the two renditions, we need the two stories. First rendition, first aspect of God is the Shem Elohim, the natural aspect of God, God working in nature, the more Midat Hadin, the more just version. If the sun is supposed to rise in the morning, it's supposed to rise in the morning. It doesn't matter how hot it is outside. It doesn't matter that maybe there hasn't been rain. The sun is always going to rise. The laws of nature are always going to occur. Hurricanes are going to occur, tornadoes are going to occur. If you're standing in the path of one, that's it. That's the laws of nature. I don't want to quite say one size fits all, but that's more of the general, there are laws and they're not broken. In contrast to that, in Perek Bet, we see the other aspect of Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Hashem Elohim, the Midat HaRachamim, where there are rules of nature, but they can be broken. Hashem can tweak them and twist them when he wants to introduce an element of hashgacha, of looking over somebody. You're very sick. According to the laws of nature, that's it. You shouldn't survive the sickness. But Hashem has rachamim on you, and you do survive. That is something, obviously Hashem has the power, but that's the facet that's going to look over people with that special uniqueness to it. So that's why we refer to it as Hashem's mercy. We look at Hashem as a more personal God, specifically for Bnei Israel, where he has revealed himself to us. We actually see the miracles, we actually see the kindnesses, as opposed to in nature, which is no less of a miracle, but it's framed in the form of nature. So we don't necessarily see the Yad Hashem. Pause and note, one of the things I hope I'll manage to convey tonight, and I'm realizing now I might not have put it so directly into my words, how much of a miracle day-to-day nature is. We tend to take it for granted, but it's amazing how it happens. When I first began the course, the way I started was something called the anthropic principle. This is a scientific term showing the conditions that made it just right, almost the coincidences that allowed man to exist. How the sun was formed, how it continues to give us power, but it doesn't blow itself up. How the position of Earth is just close enough to be able to benefit from the warmth of the sun, but not too far away that all the water is going to freeze, and not too close that all the water is going to melt away. That the angle of the Earth is just right so that we have seasons, and that the moon is going to help with those seasons. Like all these factors that scientists don't know how to explain. They see that there's a coincidence after coincidence. We know how to explain it, but I just want to put out there that that's probably the greatest of miracle, not to take it for granted. So Rav Breuer is going to look, just as the Rav did, two different stories, but rather than showing us two different Adams and their personalities, two different aspects of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that went into creating the world, and that's why we need both of them together. So we've done literary very briefly. We've done philosophical a little bit more. We're now going to turn our attention to looking at the world of science to try and understand how through science we can understand these two different stories. But before we look at science, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the relationship of Torah to science. How do we deal with the two different disciplines? On the one hand, and again, this is a message I want to make sure that comes across clear, science is based on fact and testing and proving and knowledge. Torah is based on faith. They're really two different things. I don't believe in God because I can prove God. That would defeat the purpose and undermine the whole essence of belief. I believe in God because of what I've learned, how I've been raised, what I practice, what I do. That's who I am as a religious individual. I can know about different facts of the science, and I actually know more now than I did in August about them, but that doesn't change my belief. If anything, it makes me appreciate more the belief I already had. But even if I couldn't prove these things, there's still the element of belief. So science and Torah. But my goal is to see how much more can we better appreciate the world that God gave us by looking at the science behind it. Okay? So we're going to go through different positions of people who are looking at science. What do they do? And again, please note that I'm going to start with one position, and I don't want to show that I'm attacking it, but sort of taking it apart. I'm getting it from these books. I'm not trying to attack prominent rabbis for their beliefs. So we're doing this out of kavod, just trying to understand. I don't know where he's coming from. I probably can guess, but how we can counter it. And I'm speaking obliquely. It will become clear, hopefully, in a moment. So we're looking at source number 7 right now, and we're looking at two different quotes from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And one of them, as I was rereading my source sheet, I realized I left out some of the last words of the line, so I'll read them to you, but you're still going to get the essence of what it is. The first point he's going to make is when we're looking at science and we're looking at the dating of the world, how do we know that the dates are accurate at all? How can we measure these things? There might be different standards at different times in the world. How can we say that when they're pinpointing the dates that those are really the dates? What are the dates? You can look for a moment in source 6 and just look at the different dates that are going to be listed. We'll talk about them again in a moment. So number one claim is that the dates for these different events, the creation of the universe, of the earth, of the earliest form of cellular life, of the earliest appearance of mankind, that these dates are inaccurate. His second point is going to be that maybe God created the world like that. He put rocks in there that are going to date back 14 million, or not 14 million, the rocks are going to be 4.5 billion years. He's going to put measurements in there that the universe is 14 billion years, that's how the world was created. The world is still only just under 6,000 years old. To this, we have a few people who are going to counter sources 8, 10, and 9. I'm going to go a little bit out of order. Just look for a second at the names. So one is Rabbi Eliezer, the book that I showed you. One is Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who's the son of Rav Avraham Yitzchak Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. The first name we're going to look at, Rav Giora Radler, who wrote, or it's actually Nadler, I don't know why it's saying a resh here, okay, who wrote a book called Evolutia Torat HaHitpatchut, Evolution, the Laws of Development. It was actually written by Rav Yitzchak Shilat of Yeshivat Ma'aleh Adumim, who wrote down the Torah that this man wrote. Where did this man live? In Bnei Brak. What was his position? He was the Rosh Kollel Chazon Ish. He was a student, one of the distinguished students of the Chazon Ish. So just, you can say, oh, he's a physicist, modern Orthodox, whatever you want to do. We're talking about somebody from inside a different world, that this was his position, okay? Just to put it into perspective. I want to read the Hebrew just because I find the Hebrew so beautiful, but you can read along in the English as I do so. Source number 8. ייתכן באותה מידה של סבירות שנבראו, אנו והיקום כולו ביום החמישי האחרון עם כל זיכרונותינו. מעבר לכך, יש כאן טענה מאוד חריפה על הקדוש ברוך הוא. If we say that science isn't true, or that God created the world this way, we have a very big complaint against God. כלום הוא בא בטרוניה עם בריאותיו ושתל ראיות מפלילות כדי להטעותנו בכוונה תחילה. What is he doing? Trying to trick us? שתילת אין ספור ראיות עקביות להתרחשותה של תורה האבולוציה לקיומם של דינוזאורים, dinosaurs, לפני מאות מיליוני שנים, למפץ גדול לפני מיליארדי שנים, בזמן שהאמת הפוכה לגמרי. He's planting bones of fossils as he's trying to, the age of the years, like, why are we trying to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is tricking us so much? It's an interesting counter to the point. היא נגד המגמה האלוקית שעניינה לתת לאדם כלים ראויים כדי להבין את העולם הטבעי ואת העולם הרוחני. What we're saying is that God is tricking us rather than giving us the tools of intelligence and understanding to better understand his world so that we can do what the Rambam is saying, to love and to fear him. He's tricking us. That doesn't make sense that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would do to us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo natan lanu shekol rok kedei lahatel banu. He didn't give this all to try and make fun of us. Lehatel banu. Wow, I found that very powerful. Like, Hashem gave us the world as it is. Why are we saying that it's a fake out? What about the science? Is the science legitimate? So if you look with me at source 10 from Rabbi Abiezer, Professor Abiezer, every competent scientist can distinguish between speculative theories and those that are supported by a vast array of scientific evidence. It is the former that are short-lived, whereas the latter have an excellent, record for longevity. For example, the theory of relativity and the quantum theory have enjoyed unqualified success in maintaining hundreds of physical phenomena. Well-established theories become refined, but are never simply discarded as being wrong. So he's positing that science has proven, not just from one branch of science, but if you look at biology, if you look at chemistry, if you look at geology, if you look at physics, if you look at cosmology, they're all saying the same thing, that these dates are legitimate. So to say that there's something wrong with these dates is to undermine the entire field of science. That's not to say that people haven't come up with theories that are wrong. He's acknowledging that. We all know that. We can all name many of them. But year after year, generation after generation of testing, and testing not just from one, I'm a biologist, I'm going to see something biological in everything I do, right? You go to a doctor, the heart doctor is going to see the problem with the heart, the bone doctor with the bone, they all look at their specialties. But it's not just one specialty that's coming up with this conclusion. All different elements of science are all coming together to say this. If we believe that science works, and I would hazard a guess that most of us sitting in the room have a reason to be grateful for science at some point in our lives for being around. I know I certainly do. Like, if we believe in science, how can we start saying that the same science is wrong? There's a disconnect here, and he's calling us on it. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, again, I love his words. Lebachor shesha'al al hastirot ben Torah umadat, the person who is asking about the contradictions between Torah and faith. This is source number 9. I was going a little out of order. It's the bottom of page 3. Hishavti bekitzur. I responded in short. Lo kol ma she'omrim b'shem hamada ze mada. Not everything said in the name of science is science. V'lo kol ma she'omrim b'shem haTorah ze Torah. Not everything said in the name of Torah is legitimately a Torah perspective. Not everybody is qualified to say that this is what the Torah says about something. Once you go into both of these studies well, you're a Torah expert, you're a science expert, you're going to see you're not left with as many questions as you think you had in the beginning. Okay? So that's item number 1, that we're going to take the story of creation literally, that there are major issues with it. We've just had 3 different people, again, not Deena Rabinovich, far greater and more knowledgeable, saying, maybe let's think again that there's something about this literal approach. Let's try a different approach to how do we understand the stories and how do we resolve the issues. Just again, as an aside, sorry, there are a lot of them tonight. When we have the date 5779, where do we get the date? You'll notice it never says this is year 1 in Bereshit. This is actually from the time of the Geonim that we say that that's the date of the world. I haven't seen anybody who said something against that date. That would be interesting, but everybody in the world that I've been investigating seems to accept that date, so I'm going to do it as well. The one interesting thing about this date is we start counting. Our Rosh Hashanah is in Tishrei. If you look at the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah actually states that there are 4. Okay, we don't need to go into all 4, but the important one is Nisan, that we talk about Rosh Chodesh Nisan as being a Rosh Hashanah for counting. And when we do Birkat HaChamam, when we count how many times the sun has made its cycle around, we're doing it Nisan time. So there seems to be a difference between the age of the sun and the age of the world. So just note, we have that also. How do we get the numbers that I listed in source 6? The universe, how do we know that it's 14 billion years old? The reason we know this is because at this point everybody's agreeing that the universe began with a big bang. There was a huge ball of light, of heat, of radiation, and that within a few minutes it started melting down into plasma, and then sometime later the plasma became atoms, and then sometimes later the planets were formed, etc., etc. With that understanding, if there was a central point of beginning that things moved out from, you can measure the distance outwards and calculate. Don't ask me how. I haven't calculated. I'm not a physicist. But you can then calculate how old the world is by looking at these calculations. And the calculations they come up with are 14 billion years old. Earth, at 4.5 billion years old, is done by radioactive dating, by looking at rocks, at lunar rocks, at earth rocks, at meteorites, and by using radioactive dating to figure out how long ago they were. And again, we're getting consistent answers from different rocks. I believe that the earliest rocks were found in Australia. Cellular life is dated 2.4 million years ago. We again date the rocks, but this time we find rocks with fossils in it, with remnants of the earliest forms of life. If you date the rock, if you find where that rock is in the geological era, you then know how old, how far back cellular life began. Man, the earliest man forms, known as hominins, are dated 6 million years ago. Homo, the genus of modern man, 2 million years ago. Homo sapiens, the species from which we're descended, 200,000 years ago. And sometime around 11,000 years ago, scientists, anthropologists began to notice something interesting. Man remained pretty much the same size since 200,000 years till now. Specifically, the size of the brain is going to remain the same. But suddenly, among the remnants where the bones are found, looking at the other things that are there, you're seeing signs of greater culture. Whereas earlier man, the weapons they had or the instruments they had, like unless you're trained, you think you're just looking at rocks and you don't realize that some of the rocks have a sharper edge in our tools or weapons. Suddenly you're seeing more signs of creativity, more signs of building, more signs especially of animal husbandry, of domesticating animals, more signs of culture. We call this the Neolithic Revolution, neo-life, new life, as opposed to Paleolithic, older life. And we're dating that at 11,000 years ago. I'm going to just leave those facts there for a minute. We will come back to them. As much as science can tell us when all of these things began, one question they cannot answer is why or exactly how. What existed before the Big Bang, and how did it suddenly occur? How did atoms suddenly get life in them? If you look at quotes from famous scientists, they almost use the word miracle in explaining this. They can describe what is there, they can go through the steps, but they cannot take us through those transitions through those jumps. Pretty interesting. Okay, now let's go back to how to approach signs in Torah. We're going to be starting with source number 11 and 12 with the Rambam and then Avraham Yitzchak Kook. They're going to take a metaphorical or a figurative approach to the story of Bereshit, to Prakim, Aleph, and Bet. And before you start panicking and think, oh, figurative, meaning allegorical, meaning that doesn't sound quite Jewish, again, please look at the names on the sheet. And furthermore, let's just do another quick test. I'm going to say a phrase in Hebrew, and I'm going to ask you to translate it for me, and then I want you to stop and think of how you translated it, okay? The first phrase is Vayishma Hashem. Please translate it. Okay, God has ears. God has a brain. There are neurons to take from the ear, right? You get the point. What about Yad Hashem? Okay, so obviously, what are we doing with these terms and the multitude of other terms that exist in the Torah? Okay, anthropomorphism. It's a word morph of anthro, man, dibra Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam. We have no way of understanding how God actually hears. He doesn't. But that's how we're going to understand the term. When Hashem says Yad Chazakah, he's not lifting up his hand. He didn't just win a wrestling contest. But that expression of strength is one we can relate to, so we're using terms we can understand. In other words, we're giving a figurative description to a term in the Torah. Says the Rambam, if we're doing that in our descriptions of Hashem, why can't we do it with something like Sefer Bereshit? What ultimately is the difference? There's a reason why we're using these terms, or why Hashem uses these terms. There's a reason why he's describing Bereshit. It's not meant to be a science book. The Torah is not a history book. It's not a science book. It's meant to teach us to love God. So there must be something embedded within this story that's going to help us understand God better. We're not trying to figure out the whats and the wherefores and the science of it. That's a different person's job. So let's look at the stories figuratively. It says Rav Kook, and you can see some of the underlying things. The inner meaning is what's going to be important. The Torah is concealing a lot about creation, as the Torah does. For every one sentence it gives us, one fact that we think we know, there's so many others that we don't know anything about. We're supposed to mine it and go deeper and deeper into it to find the messages. But if there's a conflict with science, who cares? That's not the purpose at all of what the Torah is about. So we can take the Torah literally and not understand the science and reject the science. We can take this portion of the Torah figuratively and mine it for other meanings. And of course, we should be doing that. But what if we wanted to look at the science and try and reconcile the science with the text in front of us? How do we look at evolution? So sources 14 and 16, we're actually going to do 16 first, are going to give us some perspectives on evolution. And then we're going to meander a little bit into Kabbalah, but just a little bit. Okay, so 16, well, this is also sort of Kabbalah, but let's start with the Zohar. Ve'etem hakol b'nei alma me'adam nafku, v'chi nachet adam harishon l'chol ha'aratzot v'olid banin. If we're saying that all the people came from Adam, did he go to all the countries and have children? V'chama nashim havule. How many wives did he have? Ela Adam lo ishtakach ela b'hai alma ela mikilhu. There were other people around, and he was just of the highest of the people at this time. V'inun titen ma'ayin atu ela mikastruta de'ara v'siyoda reka de'ela nafkin briyin mishanyan ilan mi'ilan v'kaimanan v'kimuna kishar b'nei nasha. So the mist of the earth and the assistance of the upper sky, different people were formed and lived their lives like people. So I'm not going to try and figure out what the Zohar is meaning by that. The last story in Parashat Bereshit, when you have the Bnei Elohim and Benot Adam, might reflect some of that story as well. But clearly he was not bothered by the fact that there might have been other people in the world in addition to Adam. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to it also. This is actually just based on 15, when Cain, after he murders Hevel, and he leaves Kidmat Eden, this Milifnei God presence, and he goes and he has a baby and he's suddenly building a city. The question is, who's living in that city? A city implies people and civilization. There were two of them, Cain and Hevel. It must have been a wife because he just had a baby with her, but enough people for a city, so that's where Zohar is beginning to get that idea. Looking at Rav Yisrael Lipschitz in the 1800s, describing finding bones under piles and piles of ice in Siberia. From all this, it is clear that everything that the Kabbalists have told us for hundreds of years, that the world had already existed and was then destroyed, and then it was reestablished 4 more times, and that each time the world appeared in a more perfect state than before. Now in our time it has all become clear in truth and righteousness. And would you believe, my brothers, this wonderful secret is clearly written in the first section of our Holy Torah, that the fossils are proving that there were many different worlds before the world that is told about in Sefer Bereshit. Again, I'm mentioning the Kabbalah. I'm not going to try and explain and understand. But just along those lines, I want to share something that's not on your source sheet. This is from Chagiga, in the name of Rav Shimon HaChassid, that there were 974 generations who wanted to be created before the world was created but weren't. He concludes that Hashem takes elements of these people, or some of these people, puts them in every generation, and they're the insolent ones of each generation. But the 974 is an interesting number. Why? Because of a pasuk in Tehillim. Again, you don't have in your source sheets. I'll read and translate. Zachar la'olam brito davar tziva le'elef dor. God remembered to the world the brit, the covenant he made, something that he had commanded for the 1000th generation. Asher karatet Avraham ushvuato liYitzchak. He made this treaty with Abraham finally, and then also they made an oath with Yitzchak, v'yamideha liYaakov lechok liYisrael brit olam, and then also established it with Yaakov. What? That these descendants will ultimately be given the Torah. He remembered the brit that he had 1000th 1000th generation. Problem is, Abraham is the 20th generation. And if you add from Abraham, right? Abraham to Yitzchak to Yaakov. I chose the family of Levi because it was easier for me to remember the names. Levi, Kehat, Amram, Moshe. Okay, that's the generation that received the Torah. We're at 26 generations from the creation of the world. Now let's do a little bit of the math and think about the Gemara in Chagiga, where Rav Shimon HaChassid is talking about 974 generations. Mathematicians, please. 974 plus 26 gets us to 1,000. That it could be, it was the 1000th, the generation of the 1000th. I can't do this. But that not all of them are recorded in this Torah and didn't exist in this world, perhaps. And again, I'm not going to go into it, but this we have the idea that there might have been other worlds before him. There might have been other people before the people we are referring to as Adam and Chava. Just an interesting point to keep in mind. Okay, going back to the concept of evolution, I'm going to ask you to turn to 13, and then we're going to go to 20. Sorry. When I was trying to put it together, I thought that was the order I was going to present it in, and obviously I reserved the right to change my mind. So 13, Rav Shimshon Rabbal Hirsch. This was something I just Googled right before coming over here. He lived from 1808 to 1888. And he's going to talk about the theories of evolution. If this notion were ever to gain complete acceptance by the scientific world, Judaism in that case would call upon its adherents to give even greater reverence than before to the one, sole God who, in his boundless creative wisdom and internal omnipotence, needed to bring into existence no more than one single amorphous nucleus, one single law of adaptation and heredity, in order to bring forth, for what seemed chaos, but was in fact a very definite order, the infinite variety of species we know today, each with its unique characteristics that sets it apart from all other creatures. So he's obviously referring to the Darwinism, the natural selection law. I checked the dates of Darwin. Rav Hirsch was born in 1808, Charles Darwin in 1809. Rav Hirsch died in 1888, Darwin in 1882. They really were contemporaries. Now, we know that there are a lot of issues with the theories of evolution, but it does lay the groundwork for what we call neo-Darwinism, combining that with the law of genetics, that Darwin was positing that people died out. If you weren't strong, you were going to die out. The problem is the fossil record really doesn't prove that. You'll have animals, people surviving, and then suddenly they disappear. And it seems that there's another reason for their disappearance than that they're suddenly dying out, because we would need more transitory people or things or fossils, remnants in between than we have. But what he's saying is that, let's say it could be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it has existed. Asma, so what? How great a miracle that God, from one atom, got us to where we are today. It's just a question of what we're calling the miracle. Darwin is saying it's the laws of natural selection, but that so many coincidences should have happened to get us sitting here tonight. I call that a miracle, and Rav Hirsch is leading the way with it as well. And he's in good company. In source 20, we're skipping to page 6. We're going to come back to page 5. In source 20, we're going to see the Kuzari and the Malbim. The Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Naase Adam B'Tzelmenu Kidmutenu, Zot Omeret, Ani Hu Shidragti Et HaYetzira Ve'elitiha Lefi Seder Chochma מן היסודות אל המחצבים, ומאלה אל הצמחים, ומאלה אל בעלי החיים אשר במים ואשר באוויר, ומאלה אל בעלי החיים אשר בארץ, בעלי החושים הדקים וההכרות הנפלאות. That if you look at the order in which God created the world, which is described in Parak Aleph of Breshit, I am God, Naase Adam, that I started with a domem, I started with the inanimate, and from the inanimate to the fauna, to the earliest forms of life, from the fauna to the animal kingdom, first from the simple animals, the fish and the birds, and then to the more complicated land animals, and finally to man, who has all of the senses and the ability to think. That's what evolution was saying. That's what God did. All we're saying is that it wasn't by chance that all of these things happened from one to the next. And the Malbim is going to say something very, very similar. Habriya, this is source 21, Habriya halcha mimadriga lemadriga, domem tzomeach chai medaber, v'kol hakodem haya hachana lema she'acharav. It went from inanimate to something growing, to something alive, an animal, to something speaking, and each step beforehand was preparation for what followed. V'noda shegam ba'aluta b'sulam hamadrigot lo alta habriya b'dilug rak al yadei imtzaim. And if that's not enough to show you from one to the next, that we see these transitions. And again, I love this Hebrew. Shenimtzah almog, shehu ha'emtza'i ben hadomem v'hatzomeach. We have the polyps that come between the inanimate and the earlier, the almog are the corals. Then the polyps are between the tzomeach and the chai, v'hakof, and the monkey, shehu emtza'i ben chai lemedaber. וכן בכל מדרגה עלתה בסדר מלמטה למעלה, כמו שכתוב שביציאת הצומח עלתה מדשא אל עשב וממנה אל העצים, וכן היה ביצירת בעלי חיים. We go from, in each category, from the simple to the more complicated. Again, evolution. The only difference is we're acknowledging Yad Hashem in all of these different steps.
One of the problems that people bring up in terms of that is that they do not think that this is not correct scientifically, that it took millions of years rather than Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom
We're going to get there. Hold on. We're
We're
going to get there. Don't steal the thunder. We're going to get there. Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. One thing that will help the Malbim is the use of the word Vayivra, found only in Parak Aleph. And we see it in 3 different places, in Pasuk Aleph, in Pasuk Chaf Aleph, and in Pasuk Chaf Zayin. This is source 22. The verb Vayivra is going to denote a very new, powerful creation ex nihilo. There was nothing, and now there's something. In the beginning, in Pasuk Aleph, there was nothing, and then there was the world, Bereshit bara Elokim. What about in Chaf Aleph, Vayivra Elokim et Taninim? Midrashically, there's a lot about why we needed Bri'ah for the Taninim, for these super sea monster creatures. But if we put the Midrash aside for a moment and look at the Pasuk, Vayivra grammatically really goes for the entire Pasuk, not just for the first item beforehand. Vayivra Taninim, v'kol nefesh chaya haromeshet asher chertzu hamayim leminehem, v'kol of knaf leminehu. What is he doing for the Vayivra? The Taninim, the creatures of the sea, and the creatures of the air. In other words, what is the Briah? What is this new step? from the tzomeach to the chai, from the plant life to the animal life, what we were talking about earlier, that the first sign of real life, that necessitated a vayivra, and that's what Hashem is doing here. Evolution is going around, and God is helping out where it's necessary. And finally, when is the third vayivra? When we're coming to man. That again, it necessitated, because there's a different form of brain and a different form of intelligence, it's going to necessitate the term vayivra as well. And as Hadassah pointed out, and I've got there now in the notes fine, we still haven't reconciled the question of the time difference. We can maybe say that the whole process of evolution worked, but we still got these major years to account for. So there are two different approaches that we're going to take. One is to redefine a term. What does yom mean? And number two is to redefine when we're starting to count. What is time? Let's do one at a time, no pun intended. If I asked you beforehand to translate the word Vayishma, what is a day? How do we define a day? Okay, so that means what do you need to have in order to have a day? A sun. Not only do you need to have a sun, but you need the earth or perspective in order. We have a day of 24 hours. I think there are a couple of minutes or seconds because every so often we have to adjust things. But if you're standing somewhere else, you're going to have a different set of time, a different set of days. The average day on Mercury is 1,408 hours. Its year is 87 of our years for it to go around the sun. In Mars, the day is 24 hours, 39 minutes, and 35 seconds. So time is relative depending on where you're standing. But again, you need to have someone to receive, to perceive it. As we ask in the age-old question, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Or is there only a sound if there's somebody there who can hear the sound? If there's a concept of day, of time passing, does it exist in a vacuum when there's nobody there to perceive it? So what is the meaning of a day, especially before the sun has created day 4, and before man is there who's aware of passing time? Animals don't know of passing time. They're not going to tell you that they're bored, that it's too late, that they went to sleep too early. They survive. It's only man who has the ability to recognize time passing, seasons passing, years passing as well. So what if we redefine the term yom? David HaMelech does it in Sefer Tehillim. Again, I didn't give you the source, I apologize. But in Tehillim Perek Tzadik, Ki elef shanim beinecha ki yom etmol. 1,000 years is like a day in my life. So already we're seeing that day doesn't have to mean the 24 hours that we're used to. What if we say then, instead of day, a time period, an era? What if we say that each day of creation really reflects the different stages, the different geological time periods? Who cares then how long they are? Day 1, we had the beginnings, the protoplasm of the universe. Day 2, we finally had the solar system, etc., until we get to the final day of creation with the establishment of man, and then, okay, fine. Now there's man, now we can have regular days because the world has gotten to a point where we can do that. Another side point before we go on. I want you to think about what makes man so special. What makes him unique?
Speech.
Okay? The ability to think, the ability to create, the ability to talk, to communicate, to be social. What doesn't make man special is his physical body, but the spirit that Hashem added into it. In Perek Bet, we're told specifically in Pasuk Zayin, Vaitzar Hashem Elokim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. He took earth. Now the Midrashim are going to tell us that it was special earth from here, from there, that's fine. But really, ladies, earth is earth. I had a lot of fun with Google today. Man is comprised 99% of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. The remaining 1%, or really 0.85, is potassium, sulfur, chlorine, magnesium, meaning there's not much differentiating us from everything else that's around in this world. What makes us different is that nishmat Elokim that God put into us. It's not the physical, it's the spiritual. And that's where we differ. So if you look with me in source 24, on the pasuk Vaytzar Hashem Elokim et Ha'adam at the bottom of page 6, what is this nishmat chayim that Hashem gave us? Ruach memalia, says Onkelos. Man became a speaking man. Or Rashi on the top of page Sforno. Af behema v'chaya nikru nefesh chaya. Animals also receive the connotation of nefesh chaya. Ach zo shel adam chaya shevechulan shenitvasaf bo de'ah v'dibor. This nefesh chaya actually has something a little bit different because Hashem inserted something unique, the ability to reason, the ability to speak. So we have the creation of man, and we have the insertion into man of this spiritual element. I want to look a little bit at Sforno before we go on to source 27. Sforno is going to try and reconcile the two different stories by giving us two definitions of the word Adam. Adam min mimine nefesh chaya shiyatzarti shishmo Adam ke'omro vehi Adam lenefesh chaya. Adam in Parak Aleph is the species of man, not the proper name of somebody who married Chava and had two sons, and then one died, and then another was born, but the species of man. And in Parak Bet, Vayipach ve'apav nishmat chayim, nefesh chiyunit, muchenet lekabel tzelem Elokim. This man seems to have been given something extra that wasn't given to previous man, person, group in Parak Aleph. Ka'amro v'nishmat shaddai tevinam, mikol makom vehi adam lenefesh chaya, haya im kol ze chaya bilvad, bilti medaberet, ad shenivra b'tselem udmut. That he was a chaya, he was a living being, but he didn't become Adam as this intellectual, social, spiritual, capable of thought and communication until Parak Bet, when God inserted this other element into him. That there was something special, potential, but we're now bumping it up several degrees at this point. Okay. So we've solved the problem of the 14 billion years of the universe, of the 4.5 billion years of the Earth, even of the earliest forms of cellular life. What do we do now with all of these ideas of man? So we have the hint that maybe other men existed Kabbalistically. We have the suggestion that there was a differentiation of a species of man, and then later what we're going to call Adam Harishon, as in Adam and Chava. We're now going to look at the Ho'il Moshe, and a source that I couldn't find. I was using an online source. Rabbi Hillel Novetsky has a wonderful platform called Al HaTorah, and also that was a source that I looked at a lot. He introduced me to this Ho'il Moshe. He uses him a lot in a lot of the shiurim. And then a Rav David Nisani. Rav David Nisani is from Yeshivat Hesder in Cholon, contemporary. The Ho'il Moshe, we're also going back to the 1800s, 1821 to 1898. In Italy, he was a student of the Shadal. What the Ho'il Moshe is going to say is that there were two Adams. There was this pre-Adam in Parak Aleph, who ate only from the vegetation, who had sex only for procreation, who didn't necessarily have an innate desire within him to form relationships, which is why he had to be created with a woman. There was no idea of a partnership, of an Ezer Kenegdo working together as a union. They were told to multiply, to conquer the earth. They were the height of, I don't want to use the word civilization, of the world, of creations. They were at the tallest point, but they weren't unique. There was not that much that differentiated them from the animals. They were just more advanced at that way. They were not put into Gan Eden. They were not giving the term La'avda Ula Shama. In Parak Bet, we see the changes. Again, it's the same physical being. We said that the physical being doesn't make a difference. There is no difference between what we have and what the animals have. What's different is Vaypach be'apav nishmat Elokim. It was what God inserted within the spiritual realm that makes us into the people that we are today, with the abilities that we have today and the power and the responsibilities that come with it. And that happened in Perek Bet, that there was a gap. We don't know how long this gap was between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet. It looks like it happened one right after the other. Psukim and Chumash have a funny way of doing that. Until you calculate that there were 3 generations born in one Perek, it probably didn't happen within 1 week. So again, we have no idea how long elapsed between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet, but they were 2 separate events that happened. Once we have 2 separate events that happened, and we're no longer bound to the fact that days are 24-hour periods, but that they can be broader, we now can work with the dates that we had beforehand for mankind, and we can now try and align them a little bit with what we know of science. So if we look back at the different dates, and I'm looking back onto page 3, and I'm looking specifically at the appearance of man. So we have the earliest man-like creatures that appeared 6 million years ago. The earliest Homo man, 2 million years ago. We have modern man, 200,000 years ago. And then scientists record something interesting that happened 11,000 years ago, this Neolithic revolution, where suddenly man took on new spiritual elements, new cultural elements, new intellectual pursuits that were not seen before. So we have a physical appearance of man, and then this spiritual creation of man. 2 different events, and the question then becomes, how do we date them? How do we align them with this 6,000 years that we have? So, according to Rav Nisani, the Holy El Moshe, Natan Abiezer is saying this as well. Where we're going to start, we're going to say the creation of the first appearance of man is Perek Aleph. The Neolithic revolution is going to be more Perek Bet, when we have that extra spark, that extra element. We still got a problem. 11,000 years, 6,000 years, we still have a gap. How do we reconcile that? When do we start counting from? And for this, they're all suggesting, look at source 26 and source 24. Source 26, and Hevel's story. Hevel is gone, moment of silence for Hevel. Cain has married, had a children, he's starting this whole dynasty. It's actually a very creative dynasty. They're into cattle husbandry, they're into building tents, they're into musical instruments, they're into metal. There's a nice daughter Nama there. They're all doing very nice and fine and dandy. And then suddenly the last pasuk in the parak, we're told, Vayeda Adam od et ishto v'teled ben v'tikra et Moshet. Another child is born to Adam. Kishet li Elokim zeracher tachat Hevel ki hargo Cain. I have a new way to establish myself after Hevel was killed. Shet gam hu yulad ben veikrat shmo Enosh az ucha likro b'shem Hashem. Shet is going to have a son, Enosh, and that's when they begin to call in the name of God, desecrate the name of God. Again, that's not something we're going to go into right now, but what I do want you to look at, please, is source 28, Perek Hey, which almost seems like it's the same thing happening all over again. It says Sefer Toldot Adam b'yom bara Elokim Adam b'dmut Elokim asa oto. These are the chronologies, the stories of Adam and the day that he was created. Zachar nekeva bera'am vayevarech otam v'yikra et shmam Adam bayom hibar'am. Vayechi Adam 30 u'meit shana v'yoled b'dmuto ketzalmo v'yikra et shemo Shet. We're repeating the story of Adam giving birth to Shet. Says these different sources, the Rav Nisani, the Holy Moshe, the others, this is when we start counting. This is when the 6,000 years comes into place with the story of Shet. What happened beforehand happened beforehand. It existed. It's since, within that 11,000 years of the Neolithic revolution. But we're not going to count it as the history of Earth until we finally have the child of Adam, from whom the world will eventually emanate. Because as we know, it was from Shet's number 10 descendant, Noah, that they actually went into the Teva, into the ark to survive the Mabul, this then is when we start counting, and suddenly we don't have a problem anymore because that 6,000 years works. All we had to do was shift when we're starting to count and to acknowledge that there might have been life beforehand. We're not saying that there was any world that existed before God created the world. We're acknowledging that that was the beginning. But that's not part of the 6,000 years. We're counting something else. The Toldot Adam, the world is only the world because man is on there to do Ritzon Hashem, to learn about God, to know God, to love God. That's going to start with that generation after Adam Harishon, with the introduction of Shet. That's our 6,000 years, and everything else suddenly works out. No problem, no contradiction.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch for the 6,000 years. I see 300 and 900 and, the other.
That's how long they lived.
Oh.
Oh, if we count from there to where we are today, that's the 6,000 years. I haven't done the math. I'm taking them at their word right here.
Why did they give themselves that authority to say we're going to start counting from Shais? Well,
First time numbers are mentioned.
where's the
Or that again, this is really the history. All of this was a prehistory, getting us ready for the introduction of man. This is actually going to fit in with what Rav Kook is saying. He will look at these whole two parshiot as the whole parsha of Breshit is very allegorical, metaphorical. He will say that in fact these stories did not happen. Just like Eov didn't happen, but it's there as a book in Tanakh because we need to learn something about it. The creation of the world didn't necessarily happen the way it is. Hashem wanted to teach us ideas and concepts. There was no eating from a fruit tree and a snake that could talk. We're talking about how do we respond to religious authority. If God tells us something, what are our responsibilities? What happens if we listen? What happens if we're tempted? How we overcome it? How we deal with the repercussions. There were no people, two brothers, who murdered each other for whatever reason they did, and we still don't know why they did that. But how do we deal with moral laws? What happens if you do something wrong against a fellow person? What are the ramifications? Do we have to be worried about the Ben Adam Lechavero, the man ethical laws? Do we only have to listen to God, or are we commanded for both? Those are the lessons that we learn implanted in these stories, and that's why we need them, not because the stories actually occurred. And if you think about it, that the messages are far more important.
Are we allowed to say that these things never really happened?
I'm not the one saying it. Rav Kook is.
Are we allowed to say it?
I'm following in the footsteps of a great one. I would say yes. I would say also truthfully, with the way that you're looking at Eov, if God gave it to me, there's an importance to it. The fact that it actually happened is not what's important about it. The message that I'm supposed to get is important about it. We have laws in the Torah that we can say never are there for a reason, but we're still supposed to learn them. There are messages that we're supposed to learn about these laws. It's the teaching, it's the what they represent that's more important than the factuality of it.
So what does Shais represent? And that's
The
what we
beginning of the story of the life of man on this world. Because from him we see the descendants that actually are going to survive. All of that is a story to understand what will then man's relationship be with God in the world, what is his job in this world.
So we are all descended from Shais, not from Cain. From Shais because he's the father of Noah.
So this is a whole other share, and I'll just say it in a nutshell. That little daughter Nama from Cain, the Lemech had 4 children. He had 2 wives, 4 children, 3 boys, 1 girl. The Midrash is going to suggest that Nama went on to marry Noah, simply because the Midrash doesn't like to have extra people alive in Chumash, and if there's a girl's name and there's never a girl's name, she must be listed there for a reason. So the Midrash says that that was Mrs. Noah, so that the creativity, the positive sides of Cain live on through Noah, but they're mitigated with the descendants of Shet, and therefore they're not as bad as they were just in the Cain people. That for all their creativity, that's where all the Hamas and the violence and the disgusting ways of behavior existed. So we got rid of that, and we're keeping the best part and starting anew.
So,
Yes,
yeah, so Adam is supposed to have lived only 970 years. How do you
30.
930, I'm sorry. How do you fit that into 5,000 years that you're left from the 11,000?
No, we're not counting.
Right. I haven't done the math to go from there, but
I mean, this whole thing turns the Midrash Seder Olam Rabbah on its
Well, many midrashim turn the midrash of Seder Olam Rabbah on its path, and when I made this offhanded joke about 3 generations living in one parak, that's the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Within that one parak, you have 3 generations, and Seder Olam Rabbah has no problem telling me that each individual was 7 years old when he had a child for 3 generations in a row, where the parents beforehand gave birth at normal ages, and the children afterwards gave birth at normal ages, and only for these 3 were there 7 or 8. And he has a reason for doing that, and we have to respect that. But to tell me that that's the only way of counting, right? There are many midrashim. I think when we look at midrashim, we have to appreciate why they're saying what they're saying rather than taking them as facts. And I think because there's so many midrashim available in English and they're read, we read them sometimes like fairy tale books, and we forget what was the reason that the midrash came into. These are extremely intelligent people that if they want to tell me that they're having children at 7 or 8, there has to be a reason for it. There has to be, it's not a different truth, but it's a different reason that they're emphasizing in that. What is that reason? What is that emphasis? What am I supposed to learn from it? As opposed to saying unilaterally that all of those generations were 7 and 8 years old when they gave birth.
When Cain is being punished after he kills Hevel,
Yes.
and he's asking for some saving thing, he says, because whoever will see me will kill me.
Yes.
Whoever is there.
Well, that's one of the questions that was asked. Who else is around at this point? So the Kabbalah sources are going to say that there were other people, and we can say also that from this pre-Adam that there were other people around at this point. There may be different species, different genuses of man, that the world wasn't empty and void of people at this point, the way I have in my mind this like almost cartoon image.
We're only following one stream. In other words, the Torah is only following one stream. We're not
Correct.
talking about
Correct.
But the science keeps adding explanation, and a possible answer to that. Now we know people for ages have said, oh, the Neanderthal man became extinct because it developed into Homo sapiens. Now
No, it's not developed, so that's why I'm saying it's not a single species. It's they lived and then they died out, and there was actually evidence that Homo sapiens lived at the same time, just in different areas.
They did, and they were intermarried, and then they did die out, but not because they became Homo
Correct.
sapiens. So that's a possible answer.
Yes.
Don't we usually look at Enos as the first one? Like Madam Vashita Eo with Enoski. We never refer to Seth.
So the sources I was reading here said shed. If you're going to give me that pasuk in Tehillim, I can counter with the other one. Adam v'tachzarei me'at me'elokim v'kavod v'hadar tatreu. There are 2 times when David HaMelech, who asks who is man, is for all that Enosh is the son of Shet. In some ways, he's also seen as the beginning of like this concept of humanity exists in his name. So that would just be another. I don't think that bothers me as much.
No, it doesn't bother me. I'm thinking what, in terms of language, we always refer to Leonos.
Yeah, well, that's yes. So, but we're still close enough that the dates are going to work. And yes.
If we're looking at the 6 days of creation as different epochs in evolution, not as a literal day, then what is Shabbos?
What is Shabbos? I'm going to throw another question out at you before I try and answer, and I'm not sure I'm going to answer cohesively, but let me throw out the other question. And I'm going to just first give an analogy. Pesach this year is,
Can you repeat the question?
she's asking what about Shabbos? What does Shabbos represent? Pesach this year is a Friday night. From years of making Pesach, I know how many days before I need to turn over my kitchen. I'll see how many daughters I have willing to lend me a hand when I have to actually start the cooking. I will be using all of that time. Yes, I'll rest and I'll go to sleep because I found that if I don't, nobody will eat the food. But I need all of that time. Lahavdil, when we talk about Hashem 6 days of creation, he needed 6 days. B'mamar echad hu barat olam, and he suddenly created the world. What on earth do we get the idea that he needed 6 days to complete everything? And not only that, he's not even using all of the 6 days. He's using the beginning. He's saying one thing, boop, everything comes, and then he seems to be doing nothing until Vayer Vayivoker, the next day comes and he says something again. What am I trying to say? Why do we need 6 days? Shabbos because it took him 6 days to create the world, which is what I'm trying to say doesn't really make a lot of sense? Or did he already have this concept of Shabbos on the seventh day, that therefore it took him 6 days to create the world, which is some of the sources I've been seeing to indicate that. The Rashbam is going to say it a little bit obliquely. Now, why on earth are we mentioning 6 and 7 to begin with? Because later on, Bnei Israel are going to be commanded to do Shabbos. We can talk about Shabbos creating Menucha, that he's resting, he's showing us what to do. There's also that element of that. I think the answer that I've liked the best so far, okay, just work with me here a little bit. In ancient times, the best number that existed was 6. Why 6? 6 was a number, it was a first perfect number. 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. 1 times 2 represented completion. And just before I say, like, what on earth does that matter? If you think about it, hours of the day, minutes, seconds, the clocks, like degrees of a circle are all based on this concept of 6. The months of the year, even before they were looking at lunar or the zoological, were all based on, well, no,
Zodiac.
the zodiacs. They were actually, it used to be 13, and then it was modified into 12 when the Romans took over, but now evidently they're introducing back the 13th zodiac, and I found that the one I was in forever, Scorpio in November, is no longer Scorpio, but they've shifted it back to 13. That originally was 13 because of the months of the year in Mesopotamia, the lunar calendars, just a whole other side. Okay, I was doing a lot of side reading, I found it fascinating. But anyway, let's go back to the idea. If the world was created with 6, and this was a concept that was very important to everybody else, that one of the things Hashem is trying to show us is that there's something beyond nature. This is me. I created the world. I'm giving you a task. I want you to be like me. You have to show what it is to be kadosh. This mankind is your job, specifically Am Yisrael. Therefore, we are going to have this concept of 7, something beyond the 6. It was the 7th that helped to create everything else. And on this day, on Shabbat, you're going to learn about Kedusha and then transfer that knowledge, because Kedusha is really what Hashem is all about. So that's where I think Shabbos comes into it, as a concept, not necessarily as a specific date at that point.
So the dates that you gave us of the millions and the hundreds of thousands, what do the rabbis have to say about this?
So the ones that I've been reading
Are they
have no
willing
problem
to
with
say
that.
that the world is 60 gazillion years
Yeah,
old?
they have no problem with it.
Oh,
We don't have to understand it.
Right. I mean, I think what it comes down to, and I think this is really where, this is now my final conclusion, but feel free to ask me questions afterwards, that by learning this, by scratching the surface a little bit, or at least for my journey, what I found is that I can appreciate more the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave beforehand. I'm not a very scientific person. I'll look at something and, oh yeah, that's nice. The original analogy I was going to think of was decorating a cake. I'll look at a cake, it looks so nice. What's so hard? You roll out the fondant, you put it on, you cut the little things. It's really hard to roll out fondant. It doesn't always look so nice. And the more I watch these cake shows where they're doing the competitions, the more I appreciate the mastery that goes into making that cake. The more I've read about this, if anything, my fear, like me, ani, who am I, standing in this world that God made, the complexity is overwhelming. I didn't understand how complex it was, and by looking at all of these elements that he's manipulating behind the scenes through nature, my awe has multiplied, which is why I started with the Rambam, and why I want to just conclude with the Rambam, that that's what we're supposed to be doing here, figuring out who God is so that we can serve him better. For me, this worked. This was a journey I took this semester. I hope I've been able to share some of that with you guys as well. Thank you.
wow.
That was amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Deena. Deena lives around the corner, so if you have questions, she's willing to stay here.